Hey, welcome to Two Doctors Homestead. My name's Daniel, and this is kind of a continuation of our last video where we were showing off the UPLUS 12 volt 100 amp hour battery that they sent me to test out. I'm super excited to have it. So I want to show off the battery. Picked up a new inverter since the last video. I actually really like this DeWalt 1000 watt power inverter. It was about $100, but it feels heavy duty. It came with some cables either with the clamps, or I could just screw it directly to the battery. So if you're doing more long-term setup, you would use the cables that screw to the battery rather than the clamps. So really like the inverter. Just wanted to walk you through. This is basically building your own, you call it solar generator, battery backup system, whatever you want to call it. We're going to go through and we're going to hook it all up and make some coffee, right? So it's funny, just saw a meme that showed the coffee in the battery. That's what I was trying to do on the last video, but we're gonna do it now. I said the other inverter didn't work, so you always test your equipment. You always test your backups. This is a 1000 watt power inverter, DeWalt. Said very happy with it. I like this inverter. I think it's gonna do what we need to do. Something kind of fun on the inverter. It actually has a usage chart that tells you the watt usage of different tools and equipment, stuff like laptops and whatnot. So that's useful to have, useful to know. So a few things you need if you're putting together your own battery backup is you need your battery and you need your inverter. So your battery runs at 12 volts. Most of your appliances are going to run at 120 volts, so you need something to bridge them, and that's the inverter. It takes the 12 volt, makes 120 volts, right? There's other 240 volt and that kind of thing. We're not touching 240 volt. We're just going 12 volt on your standard battery to 120 volt on our coffee maker or other appliances, right? So this is 1000 watt inverter. It can go up to 2000 watts. This is a 12 volt battery, 100 amp hours, right? And you might be looking at, hey, how do I know what I need, right? You either want to put in your solar system, battery backup system, or you just want to get like a little Jackery, Blue Eddy, something like that. How do you know how much power you need? If you're going to go down that road, if you're actually going to start investing money into equipment, I would get something like this, right? This was maybe 15 bucks on Amazon. It's a little, just little voltage, checker, right? It tells you what your wattage is, well, I guess watt meter, I'll say, right? It tells you what your wattage is. So if you plug something in, you plug into this, it tells you how many watts. That's going to tell you how big of an inverter you need, and also you can start doing the math on how much battery you need based on how long you want to run that appliance. So if you're talking about spending serious money on any kind of battery backup system, or you just want to build your own, save some money, which I'd highly recommend, this is probably a good place to start plugging stuff into this, and we'll show you on this. I think you'll be able to see it in the camera as we're going through this. So you start with your battery. This is a voltmeter here. We'll get this set up. We'll check how much our voltage is on the battery since the last video. One nice thing about the lead acid is they don't drain as quickly as the lithium. I know I'm a big fan of the lead acid, and I've mentioned that many times. All right, we should be good for DC. So for the voltmeter, I do negative and then positive, right? So negative, positive, and it's telling me 12.85 volts. So it's not completely full, but we should have enough power for this. So these are good to have. This is just a regular voltmeter. Just depends. If you're doing kind of electrical troubleshooting or anything like that, you might want a voltmeter. If you're just putting it together a system, maybe you don't need that. Once again, this is really your upfront sizing your appliances. What's your watt draw on the kind of things you'd like to run. But in terms of building your own system, battery, inverter, and then battery charger, this is just a basic battery charger I got at Walmart. Was not expensive, like 25 bucks. Now this one's not a super huge battery charger, kind of a trickle charger. I think it was 3 amp. So I mean, it's not going to charge anything fast, but it will keep your battery charged. So really these 3 items in a box, and you've got your battery backup system. And I'll probably build a box kind of inspired by the inverter, mount the inverter to it, and have a little portable system, wooden box with wheels on it. If you wanted to add solar, you could get a solar charge controller for maybe 10, 15 bucks or more. They get more expensive than that. It's just that's the cheapest I've seen them on Amazon. And the solar charge controller would let you plug a solar panel into the charge controller and charge the battery that way. Right now, this battery, the way it's set, we'd have to charge off of the wall, right? Just it'll store the electricity for blackouts or convenience or anything like that. So we'll go ahead and hook up the inverter. All right, so we're gonna use the big alligator clips, I think they're calling here. So for this, we'll go positive, and then we're gonna go negative for the battery hookup, which is the opposite of the voltmeter as I understand it. Right, so we're gonna turn the inverter on. So last inverter on the other test just wasn't working. Get a little fan, and that's all right. You need a little fan action. So once again, loving this inverter. Has the USB chargers in the front and 2 outlets, right? So we could take these 2 together, and you're on the road, you're on the go. You've got, you know, it's a 100 amp hour battery, but because it's lead acid, you only get half. So you got 50 amp hours, you got 1,000 watts. So that's not a bad setup on the go. Right, so you can kind of maybe see that. That's powered on. We're using 0 watts so far. And of course, grid down. Actually, we had power outage here in Texas, kind of a big storm. Hit us about 4 a.m. Total blackout, lasted for a little while. But I tell you what, 4 a.m., first thing you want to do is make a cup of coffee. When the grid's down, the power's out, you still want your coffee, or at least I did. So something like this will at least get you your coffee. And if you have the solar setup, you know, it just becomes renewable, right? You guys understand that. Solar's charging the battery, inverter's powering my coffee machine, coffee's powering me. Circle of life right here, right? So we're doing Pete's Coffee Dark Roast, just old school percolator. So that's plugged in, that turned on. Right now I'm using 1 watt, inverter's on, everything's on. This is already preset water and coffee. I realize as I'm setting it up, I'm pouring water, working on the battery. 2 things don't go well together, but it does if you need the coffee. So we're just gonna brew and see what happens here. Inverter kicks on. There it says 700 watts. Not happy about that. All right, well, that's a test for you, right? So the coffee machine's going to use more wattage than the inverter. It's still beeping here. It's not happy at all. So now to test it out, because I did not test how much electricity the coffee maker needs, I'm just going to plug this into the wall, turn it on, and see how much electricity it uses. I'll be right back. Alright, we're coming back in on this here. So I plugged this into the wall. Says it uses 1,000 watts, right? That's showing on the screen was 1,000 watts when I plugged it in the wall. This is a 1,000 watt inverter. So I'm not giving up on the coffee that easy. We should be able to make coffee. We're going to see if it's going to beep and what it's going to do. But we're going to make this happen here. So I'm going to hit brew. We'll watch the meter here. 19 watts. It's not happy. I'll plug this from the middle here. Alright, so we're pausing here for a second. I was just kind of checking out the inverter, the battery, and I'm just putting a little more charge in the battery. I thought the 12.8 volts would be enough, but we're going to try to pump up the charge a little bit. I want my coffee, I want the inverter to work. Once again, 1,000 watt inverter, it can surge to 2,000 watts. Coffee machine, when I ran it through my little watt meter, was using about 1,000 watts, so it should be able to run the coffee maker, right? This is critical to survival, is the coffee maker, right? So just to do some math for you, to give you an idea how to do the math, we know it's a 100 amp hour battery running at 12 volts, but because it's lead acid, we can only go about 50% down. So if we do 12 times 50 amp hours, now if it was lithium or any of the lithium type batteries, you could go better than 50%. So this is probably about equivalent to roughly to a 50 amp hour lithium battery, but that gives me 600 watts worth of power. So this is a 1,000 watt power inverter. I have 600 watts. You're like, hey, how does that work? Right, we know this was using 1,000 watts, so we did 1,000 watts. It would take an hour here, so we're going to go 1,000 watts divided by, we'll clear all this out, 1,000 watts divided by 60 minutes. So this should be taking 16 watts a minute of power out of the battery, I think. If I'm doing the math right, I've got 600 divided by 16. So theoretically, I should be able to run the coffee maker for 37 minutes if I can get it to run at all. Right, so we're putting a little more charge in the battery. Did a little crazy math there. Hopefully it's right. We'll find out here. Said it should run. I know I'm right on the edge of the capabilities of the inverter, but it's supposed to be able to surge. We know the battery wasn't full, so full on this battery I think we said was about 14.7 volts. So I can put some more charge in there. We're going to give the battery a few minutes to charge. Empty would be maybe 10, right? If it was the 10 volts, it would be empty. It was about 12.8. We'll get it closer to 14, and then we're going to hook everything back up and try it again. These are the alligator clip cables it came with. The cables to hardwire it were a little bit heavier duty. I might switch to those cables, so depending on the amps you're pulling, really has to do with the thickness of the cables, right? So those are a little bit thicker cables. So if nothing else works, I will try to put on the thicker cables, but we're going to stick with this. So this is a live demo. I haven't tried this before. I literally just pulled the inverter out of the box. I think I mentioned this is a this is a modified sine wave inverter, not a pure sine wave inverter, which means it's not going to work with sensitive electronics. So you could say the electricity in your house is pure sine wave. Anything less than pure is a dirtier electricity, right? So modified's not as clean. Some devices need that cleaner power. Right, so just a way to look at it, this is kind of dirty power. I think the coffee maker should be able to run on the dirty power. If you want a pure sine wave inverter, you're going to pay more, right? So if we're trying to put together a basic system here, I'm not going pure. Now that my battery backup for the house is a pure sine wave inverter, but that was a much more expensive inverter. So we're going to see where the batteries are at now. Check this out. I can see over my shoulder, 14.09. So I'm a little impatient. I'm going to try it on 14 volts. So let's we'll just do this together here. Blah blah blah. Unhook the negative. Unhook the positive. So I'm going to unplug the battery charger. All right. So we're not charging the battery anymore. So we're going to hook up the red, the positive. Hook up the negative. All right, so the inverter should be plugged into the battery. I'll put this guy back in. Keep an eye on our watt drain. All right, turn the inverter on. So it's showing 0 watts. Plug it in the coffee maker. That puts us at 1 watt, just plugged in, turned on, not brewing yet. So if you can turn this so you can see the watts as we go. All right, we're going to try this again, live demo here. Let's see. We really want this coffee. This is an important part. It can brew here. Let's see what it does. Didn't die. No. It died. Same issue as before. So we're going to troubleshoot a little bit, I think, and we'll pause. I think I'm going to hook up the more heavy-duty cables. See how that goes. Just leave that plugged in, so I'll be right back. All right, we're back. You may notice I switched out the cable, so this is a heavier duty cable. It's now hardwired to the battery rather than the alligator clips. Everything's plugged in, so let's find out. This is live demo here. We're gonna hit the brew button and see if it can handle my coffee making addiction here. Everything's beeping. I'm waiting. See what happens. All right, it hasn't died. Look at that. So it was the cables, right? The cables, the alligator clip cables, whatever you might call them. You can see it's a thinner cable, right? This is a much thicker cable. So fortunately the inverter did come with 2 sets of cables. It needed the heavier duty cable. It wasn't able to get the amps it needed through the thinner cables. So we'll keep an eye on it here. So we know we're running at about 934 watts. This is 1,000 watt inverter. If I did the math right, I think I said was it 37 minutes. So this battery should be able to run the coffee maker for 37 minutes if I'm doing the math right. If I'm not, let me know. But I don't think it's going to take 37 minutes to make a cup of coffee. I'll check the voltage here. We can see our voltage drop as it's making coffee. 11.9, so it's using electricity for sure, but we knew it would. All right, see how far we get. So not to make it overly complex, right? I said I'm testing this live. I didn't run through it before I made the video. I want to be, show you guys the trials and tribulations here. It's always a learning experience. I mean, I do have some basic understanding of these components, but it's a learning experience. But it means don't get discouraged, right? If you want your coffee, you got to stick with it till the end. But definitely test your equipment, right? If you've got a small inverter, if you've got a Jackery or a Bluetti or one of those systems, so we've got 50 amp hours, we've got a 1,000 watt inverter, we're making our coffee, but that's kind of pushing the edge of the system to get the coffee. And once again, in this case, the cables were too small. So if you're building your own system at home, you might have to experiment a little bit. I get that's the draw of just buying something already made, but you have a lot more control of the individual components if you build it yourself, right? In this case, we know we want 1,000 watts. We've got the 50 amp hours of battery. So you got the 50 amp hours times the 12 volts. You've got your 1,000 watts coming out on this side. And it's really important as I'm getting my cup of coffee here. All right, you can see that. That's the most important part here. I'm glad we were able to get it to work. It was, it's always frustrating when you plug everything in and it doesn't work when you know it should. It should have worked here. Staring intently, right? We want to get the coffee to work. So one of the, as we're waiting for the coffee, obviously want the coffee here. Something to keep in mind, and I know I've mentioned it in videos before, so this is a deep cycle battery. This is over 2,000 cycles. It's a 100 amp hour battery. This is more storage, more battery storage than you would get in a regular car battery. However, in an emergency situation, you could just have the inverter and plug it into a car battery, right? If you don't have the charger, the alternator in your car will charge the battery. So you could do this, run this off your car if you wanted to, if you needed to. If you had multiple 12 volt batteries available, multiple car batteries available, you could line them up and use something like this off of those. Any kind of deep cycle battery, right, is going to be preferred because it's really designed to handle that fluctuation, the power down, power up, right? Where the car battery isn't necessarily built to be drained quite as much. So So this is exciting. Hopefully you guys can see a coffee maker brewing here. Probably do some videos on building a box to put all these components in it, right? I want to mount the inverter, I want to be able to see the front of the inverter, mount the battery, mount my charger, all inside of a little box. I've got a battery gauge I didn't set up for this test, but we'll get the battery gauge set up in the box, give me something, little something to do, put the components to use, and then it just becomes a little portable power bank. In terms of cost, I think I mentioned this is about a $200 battery from UPLUS. The inverter was about $100, so this is about a $300 setup. The little watt meter was, I think, about 14 bucks. That's not necessarily part of the setup as much as it's good to know if the appliances you want to plug in when you're sizing your system are going to work. Right, so we kind of pushed the edge. We went past the cables, so you want to make sure you're sized properly, and this guy will help you do that. Voltmeter's good for troubleshooting, seeing what your electricity level is. There we go. So we're making coffee. I'm pretty happy about this. This is actually my older coffee maker. We got the Keurig, but I kept the drip coffee. It's good to have. It's useful. You want to make a pot of coffee, you should have your backup coffee maker. You don't want to hoard stuff, but a few things are worthwhile to keep around, and certainly a good old-fashioned drip coffee maker is good to have. It's almost done there. All right, that's really what I wanted to show, guys, was you know, kind of starting to hobble together components to have your backup power system and actually test it out, actually put it to work. We did a little bit of troubleshooting there because it didn't work initially, but it is working now, and the coffee maker's almost done making my pot of coffee. And I'll check the electrical one more time before we tap out here. I turn it on, would be great. About 11.83, so it's holding up. There's still enough juice in the battery. It's not dead. You couldn't run this all day off the battery. As I said, it's probably about 30 minutes or so if the battery was full, but 30 minutes is more than enough time to get my pot of coffee. If I had the solar, you know, you could charge it up with solar, get your coffee in the morning. I might test the system out. I did the hot plate to make some oatmeal in another video. That was, I think I said that was about 1400 watts, so that might be too much for the inverter. We'll see. 1000 watt inverter, 2000 watt surge capability, so I will plug it in and see if it'll actually work, if it'll be able to sustain that. There we go. We're getting our pot of coffee. We're at 8 cups now. I just gonna need a little straw, and I'll be good to go. So thank you for watching, and we appreciate you.